Hey everybody, Jonathan Fields, and my guest today is Flash Rosenberg, who is, in her words, an attention span for hire. We're going to get into that, find out what that is, and really explore the amazing things that she does in the world. So Flash, great to have you here with me.
Thank you.
Let's start with this really fascinating job description. I think I've heard so many people tell me what they do, and I have never heard any variation or anything similar to attention span for hire. Talk to me about this.
Well, to me, it's never been about any kind of supply or position, job or career. It's about how much can we get to know about what there is and what your place is in it. Mm-hmm. And so as a photographer, I feel more like I'm just hired to pay attention to what's going on. You know, if I'm drawing a conversation at the New York Public Library, where I'm artist in residence, I draw what I'm hearing when people are discussing their books, their projects, their ideas, their provocations, and translate it as a listener. Like, what am I making out of it? And so it's this attention span for hire. It's about writing, taking photos, cartooning, and performing. And whenever I would tell people I do all four of those things, they'd say, "But what do you really do?" And that to me is as absurd a question as somebody saying, "I've got 4 kids. Oh, which one do you like?" You know, like, they are all part of what is happening even between us right now. We're looking, we're recording it, we're coming up with some way of making it distilled to mean something to somebody later. We're performing, we're writing, you know, talking is a form of writing. Writing comes out of what it is we need to say. So to me, it's just about how alert can we be in any one moment to grab something and create something. That,
and I love that, because you're not describing what you do based on sort of, you know, like, okay, based on a particular singular element of it, or you know, like based on some sort of common conception. It's sort of like you really zoom the lens out and say, what's the bigger energy that I bring to the work that I do? And then the actual things, you know, like photography and writing, performance and storytelling and illustration, cartooning and all, those are sort of modes and vehicles for you to to take this one thing and manifest them in the world.
Right. I mean, it goes back to college. I majored in a question, not a discipline. Because people say, well, with everything you do, what did you major in? You know, were you an art major? Were you this? I said I didn't want to be an or an ist. I didn't really set out to be a photographer, a scientist, a philosopher, or an artist. What I wanted to do was take courses that help me understand how to solve this question that I'm never going to solve, which is, how do we know the things we know when we haven't been told? Mm-hmm. How is it you walk into a party and you go over and talk to that person? What drives you? And it's, you know, you go into a department store and there's all that merchandise there and you touch that sweater. And so I think it's art, it's history, it's psychology, it's a kind of passion, a kind of athleticism. It's everything kind of blended. And so I wanted to know more about what the blended is. And so that's why I do what I do. I'm just really trying to understand what's going on and not just judge it or compete in it, but really absorb it so I can give it a new meaning to it.
So, which I love. I mean, and I love the fact that you're starting with a question rather than an answer, because I think we all start with questions, but a lot of times we don't want to own that because it means that we're out there not knowing necessarily what comes next. We'd rather just think that we're hanging our hats on, you know, like answers or specific, you know, directions. But I think the life of a seeker or an artist or somebody who's deeply creative, and I think a lot of us are, but we just keep it buried, is that you have to consistently take action and make decisions without knowing.
Right. Well, and also it's a different kind of assertiveness to go from question to question. Instead of saying, I know and I'm doing that, say, what is it I want to know next? I mean, I've even fallen in love with various people based on what they knew that I wanted to know next. You know, and because I'm always wondering, why this person, why that person, if you think about it personally, if you think about it aesthetically, like, what is it I want to know? Like, I've never been interested in fame as the goal, which a lot of artists get caught up in because it does fuel your career if you get into that. But to me, it's much more interesting what I get to know than in who gets to know me. So as soon as I'm doing one subject and let's say I'm doing it relatively well, like I did a lot of photography, I'd exhibited in museums and in galleries and all that, but then I went from there to performing, or to filmmaking, then from filmmaking to performing, and then from performing back to cartooning and drawing. And it was never that something was left behind, but it was just this aggregate of what became a priority emerged. And it's because I just wanted to keep knowing more about the undulation, let's say, even between disciplines. Like, how is something different if you communicate it in a photograph,
right,
or if you do it on the radio, or if you do it as a written piece that people read? And that's what's so interesting, let's say, when there's interviews that are going to be published.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there's always that weird catch, because when you're talking it sounds jaunty enough, then you read it written and you're like, ugh.
I've been there numerous times. I'm like, no, that's not how it whole went down.
Yeah, but to understand that, then you are more aware of even how we're capturing it, whether we're capturing it in ourselves, capturing it with a camera, capturing it in a drawing,
mm-hmm,
capturing it in letters. You then can understand more about how to prepare the information or how to synthesize it.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is I've noticed that, so I'm a writer, like I write blogs, I write books, and that's just one of my medium. Mm-hmm. And what I've noticed is that when I change even from typing words to handwriting words, it really changes my creative output, which took me by surprise when I first started to do it. But now as a regular part of my writing, I'll intentionally move between notebooks and keyboard, because I just know that it spurs something different in me. That's slight change in process.
Right. Well, to me, the most perfect piece of paper on earth was in second grade, where you had a big space on top to draw, and then the line part underneath to write the story.
Right.
And somehow, as you evolve, you have to choose. If I write, they say, "Well, you draw too?" Yeah, I did it in second grade. What happens? Like you just keep up with it. But I kind of go by something, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not particularly quoting it, but Jean Cocteau is one of my favorite artists, and he used to say, he would write until the alphabet was too limiting to express the abstractions and the sensations that he was feeling. So then he had to take the lines from the letters and start drawing. And then he started drawing and drawing, but then that got too abstract, and in order to connect back to people, you had to use the alphabet again. And that is what I think as a portrait of what I'm trying to do.
Right. It's just like a seamless interweaving of different media, because it's all it's this dynamic form of expression that is a fabric.
Right.
That really that's amazing. I love it. One of the first exposures that I had to your work was through what do you actually call the illustrations? Is it live illustrations?
I call it live drawing. I'm trying to put the ing back in drawing. Yeah. Drawing. It's something happening. It's alive. It's at the moment that you're drawing. It's not that thing that's done when that's dead and stopped when you're done. That should just be a draw. The drawing is the thing.
So there's more action. There's more activity.
So I'm interested. That's so that when I do the animations, it's not that I don't know how to do classic animation, but that I think having the hand draw it, you then see that it's one person's point of view, their perspective. You're brought into it more personally. Even the way I can control the movements, I'm zooming in and zooming out like you do with the cameras, because that's more how our eye is. That's a person taking it in. So something intimate happens without you saying, having to reveal something that's just kind of like too much information. It's a visual kind of perceptual intimacy.
Yeah, you almost feel like you're looking over somebody's shoulder as they're creating something. But when you really take a look back, and you also notice, well, this isn't just somebody animating or drawing. This is somebody also. There's production, and there's direction, there's cinematography going on, and there's messaging, and it's a much bigger thing. But it feels so flowing, and we'll include some links to some of the work that you've done so people can understand what we're talking about here. But they're these short things which are amazing experiences that you almost feel like you're looking over the shoulder of somebody as they're doing this.
Well, also, it's not just trying to draw what's being said. It's not meant to be literal. I'm not even trying. I may even get it wrong. I'm listening and I'm a little in delay. If they have to say it, then I draw it. Or if I'm interpreting something that's let's say from the piece Imagine. It's using text that's there, but how am I understanding it? It's part of that same process of understanding how you're a participant in the things they're created. This is almost like I call it a social media mindset, because instead of thinking, oh, they're the celebrities over there doing everything really good, and I'm now just sitting back and waiting to hear, I'm engaged, I'm listening. And what I've discovered, the more I draw people talking or conversations, that when nothing's being said or false things are being said, it's not visible. It's a really interesting thing. My fantasy, and I may have to affect it, would be to have a whole room drawing a talk, because you listen in a different way. We're not just passive taking it in. Your mind doesn't necessarily dart to what it is you wish you were doing as soon as this was over.
Right.
You know, you still wish for things to be over. That's a very human wish. I think it's, but I do think that there's something very interpretive. And for me, I think in pictures. I mean, that's how I studied. I mean, if I had to memorize text to do theater, I would see the letters on the paper as a script. So one of the things this has enabled me to do is learn how it is I learn things and know things. And I think other people who took to drawing, it's not about, gee, I draw well or draw good, or it has to be a great drawing. In fact, the best thing about drawing things live like that is it removes procrastination. You must draw it right now. I mean, and since everybody's going to wait until they can do it better, I'm not waiting until I can do it better anymore.
Right.
I try every time to draw as best I can. How come it always looks like I did it? I mean, isn't that an unusual element? Like anybody who draws, you think, I'm trying really hard. You know? And I think, I mean, I've come up with some sort of bogus theory. I mean, maybe it's even true. Is that I believe that each person has a very specific attention span for reality. And I will pay attention to just a certain point. I can draw it that much realistic, and at a certain point I go, that's enough, and I make up the rest. And I think that every cartoonist has their nanosecond that they give up. And the give up is your uniqueness. I don't know. I hope sometimes to work with some scientists to try to figure this out.
But I don't think it's just cartoonists. I think it's everybody, and in every profession.
Yeah.
You know, I think we bring that lens, you know, and there are times where we can try and stick doggedly to the data or the fact or the circumstance, the way it actually exists in the world. And then at some point we're just kind of like, screw it. You know, and you just go into your own, and like you really wear the lens on a deeper level, and you go into your own space and your own interpretation, maybe just go off into your own expression and understanding of what's going on. And that's not a bad thing. I think a lot of people think it is.
Well, people are always trained to think that they have to be coherent. They have to be like themselves or they won't be themselves. I'm most like myself when I'm not doing what I should be doing. You know, like, I mean, that to me is like a great freedom to be playing around, and I should be more specific. Like, you know, going with a friend and shopping for winter coats at Macy's, and people say, no one will find us here, you know?
That's great.
I think, I mean, this is more connected to perception studies than it is to drawing, to get back to even to further amplify or embroider why attention span for higher works. And that one of the things I've done recently is I taught a course at Cooper Union called Underground Creativity that took place entirely in the subways. I always thought if you look at a subway, it'd be a great place to play school.
Right.
And what I love about the subways is everybody's in there, and everybody looks like they're not paying one bit of attention to what's going on. And everybody knows exactly what's going on in the car. And so it's an interesting place to try to look at what's going on. And so I've come up with this whole series of subway games, where games you play in your mind when you're stuck in a crowd of strangers.
So like what are examples?
Well, you start off with something sort of innocent, like look at the shoes, guess the face. Look at the face, guess the shoes. Another subway game is, you know, nuclear subway, which is, let's say there's a major disaster and the only people left on Earth are in your subway car. You must pick someone to mate with to continue the human race. You know, and you think, he's cute. Oh, he's reading, you know. And so it's interesting. You could bypass a lot of therapy by just having people try to analyze how they make decisions. And then it also can go in reverse, where it's not just I'm thinking about what's going on. Imagine a subway game called Jury Duty. Imagine the 12 people seated nearest to you are the jury, and you've just been accused of a heinous crime. Are you going to be acquitted or convicted? You know, and he's just thinking about all these different things.
What I love that also is that we spend so much time going throughout our day unaware, or the way you explained, like almost like deliberately pretending we're unaware but actually aware. And then it's amazing to me how much of life we miss because we're just so internally focused. And these are games, you know, which are really just designed to make you more aware of not only of your environment, but there's, you know, so I'm a meditator. And one of the things I love about mindfulness is that it operates on two levels. It trains attention, but it also trains meta-attention. It trains your awareness of where your attention is or isn't. And these are things which in a way sort of operate on those two levels also.
Yeah, I call it playfulness.
Yeah, I like that better, actually.
Because then people don't
Much
have
less
to,
clinical,
well, people
right.
don't have to join it. You know, it's just
Right.
it's just a way of doing it, and that playful is not, in fact, insulting. That to actually, you know, one of the things I like about documenting events, because that's what I do, that's like jobbing out the skill set. It's almost like a day off, even though it's physically grueling to be climbing around and taking photos of weddings, bar mitzvahs, whatever, you know, anniversary parties. But that it's a day where you remove your judgment. You're just looking, look what the humans are doing. Oh no, now they're doing that. And that actually informed an awful lot of my ability to make snapshots with a pen. Because it's snapshots of things that can't be seen. You can't crawl around to go get them. And I'm getting tired. I'd rather just sit down and draw the stuff. So, you know, it's an interesting way of taking what it is you've learned from one discipline and applying it to another. And that is my way of having a lot of plates spinning on sticks all at once to keep very, very aware of what's going on.
One of the curiosities I also have is that, you know, I was taught as a young age that when people say, oh, I can't draw, or I can't make art, or I can't do this, or I can't do that, that, you know, it's complete fiction. And that a lot of times what's actually happening is it's not about I can't do the technical skill, but it's also, it's people not honoring sort of their innate creativity or their own unique viewpoint, but also people associating, people not actually seeing what's before them. What are your thoughts around that?
I think it's not so much a fault of seeing or that, just like we're afraid if we don't do it well, we shouldn't.
Yeah.
And that artists aren't afraid of doing things badly. I do everything badly. I mean, I do it badly and then maybe it'll become uniquely mine. It's not like there's, it's not trying to be perfect in a society that really demands a lot of perfection. And you can get there from it. You just have to work hard. You just have to do it a lot. But I love the way people who say they can't draw. Like one of the assignments on the subway was you had to draw the person across from you. If that person left, you had to continue drawing with the new person who sat down. And you drew then the creature who sat across from you. So that, you know.
It's like an amalgam of whatever.
And you know, I don't know where I got the idea that drawing didn't have to be good, but when I would be in a car on a family trip in the back seat, I would hold a pen on a paper and just trace the whole car ride on the bumps so we'd have a map for how to go home. I didn't know that wasn't an accurate map, and maybe I didn't care, but it made a really good pattern no matter how you drew and how it wiggled.
Right.
You know, and just playing, I think I just like the sensation of a pen on paper anyway. So,
and I think that is such a huge thing. I mean, I think so many people are so afraid of not creating something and that they can put out into the world, and then they're going to be judged for not being good enough, not being perfect. And that shuts down so many people in art, in business, in life, in relationships, is this fear of judgment for not being good enough on some level.
See, my fear was different. I was afraid I would forget. I remember being about 6 years old and saying, you know, when I'm older, I wonder if I'm going to forget what it's like to be 6 years old. I better make some notes.
You're thinking of this.
I better make some notes. You know, and I've always made notes about how to behave so the younger self could advise the older self. Like I remember being, you know, around 18 and seeing women who are now about my age with long, long hair. They didn't look young, they looked like witches. I said, make a note, get your hair cut when you get to a certain place. Like, and I was making notes because I'm having a conversation with myself throughout my life in both directions. You know, and I think that that's part of then a playfulness of what it is to be the creature you are in the time period you're in. I mean, another course I taught was called Future Nostalgia, about documenting your anticipated past. And you had to think about how do we encode things into memory? You know, what is it about what's going on now that I will want to remember in the future? And exercises to help do that might be something like, I made the students do, take a photograph of 10 things that are in your home that weren't there 10 years ago. Now draw 10 things that are going to be there in the future that aren't there yet. And you have to think about yourself in time. And you know, so I think that when I'm taking notes, you know, making the notes for animation, it's also thinking about what is it that's memorable about this.
Right.
And that what then school was good for was not about the course particularly that you studied, but that how do you sift through information to make a succinct note that is the thing you need to know. Not to know for the test, but that you need to know because of what you're interested in and where you're going to take it later.
Right. And there's, I mean, it's such a great point, is that what you just, that last part of it especially, it's like not for the test, but because it's intrinsically interesting or meaningful to you as you move forward in whatever you end up exploring. And I think very often we're focused on the test. What is that test?
Right. Well, one of the things, because obviously majoring in a question wasn't a degree program offered by the University of Delaware.
No kidding.
What happened was I got a scholarship, and then in the fine print in the course catalog, it said that the state of Delaware had a moral obligation to educate its citizens, but you had to major in something that, so if you did not, if they didn't offer the major in something you wanted to major in, they'd pay the difference for you to go somewhere else. I thought, this is how I'm going to get out of Delaware. So I came up with a major that wasn't in the catalog. How hard could that be? I ended up staying there to do it, but that it was about inventing what I needed to study. And so one of the terms from the Dean of Arts and Sciences is that I had to write a paragraph or a page about why I was going to take any course that I was assigning myself to take, whether it was in communications, social science, history, and that if instead of saying I'm taking this because I'm forced to, you said I've decided to take this and this is why I need to know this, I think that would really put a different spin on people's attitude about feeling put upon and beset by structures that are beyond them, when in fact you're responsible for it.
Yeah. No, and that makes a huge amount of sense, and it's the exact opposite of how most of us go through the educational process in our lives. I'm curious how, so you got a degree, and then you've moved through a whole series of evolutions in what you do, and it seems like there's no end to this evolution. It's just you're in process all the time. Some of the particular things that you do right now, can we zoom in and sort of explore specific examples of how your exploration, your question, your constant creation manifests itself?
That's a very well put question. I'm trying to figure out the specific answer in terms of which project I'm working on.
Yeah, what are the specific types of things that you're working on these days that are capturing your focus?
Well, what I'm doing now is I'm trying to expand it. I mean, the conversation portraits for Live from the New York Public Library have a very specific kind of, almost a uniform look, which respects then all the speakers in a very democratic way. So I'm really trying to just draw my response to key items in the talk to make something that isn't a soundbite, but a sensation of what I walk away with. If you leave a talk, the lecture doesn't end the minute you left the building. You then go back and think about it some more. Maybe you then read the person's book. And I'm trying to figure out what happens during conversations. I moved to New York for the conversations. Yes, people were talking in Delaware, but I wanted to come and talk about what we were talking about here in New York. And so I'm interested now in how I then expand that and also expand it into the things that I'm wondering about, because I've also done a lot of writing, but I've now sort of learned how to do the live drawing, invented a form. I'm not saying that drawing is something I invented. Cave people invented this. This is not particularly new. I'm aware of that. But I want to now expand it so that it mingles, and finally I'm in a discipline that does use everything that I've always been involved with, all the poetries. The poetry of making something very concise, because I'm also in a poetry collective. On the 1st and 15th of the month, I send out a poem of 14 lines or less to an invited group. And we do once a year the annual Festival of the Short Poem at the Bowery Poetry Club. I do Monologues and Madness, which is a performance series that happens the first Monday of the month at Cornelia Street Cafe, and where I write a 4-minute new piece. And then those pieces are now becoming scripts that I'm planning to animate to have my own stories come to life. And one story that I just did for The Moth, which is an urban storytelling extravaganza that I just love. I love them. I did a piece on the main stage, and I'm going to now take that story that was told and transform it into an animation and play with what it is. What's the difference between being a creature on stage that's telling the story, a voice that is narrating the story, adding in drawing and adding in photographs, and having it have this theatrical way of being that is all the languages I speak, now babbling at once to create something that's really precise, concise, and moving and funny. I mean, all I wanted to do was draw. So I was the drawing person. But then you needed to have photographs so that you could draw things more realistically. I mean, I learned to draw by tracing faces in magazines. It's a good way to learn to, get the face right and get the proportions. And so then I said, well, instead of trying to find clip files, this is before Google, I said, well, I'll take photography. So I couldn't stand figure drawing. Not because I didn't like naked people. Who doesn't like naked people? But why would you torture somebody to make them hold a position when you could just take a picture and draw them? I always was trying to reduce suffering.
I never actually wondered about that, but now they're saying, I'm like, why do they do that?
I was like, I guess they feel I said, let's just put people out of their agony and get on with it. That's me. I have a get on with it kind of aesthetic. So then I took photography and thought, this is very cool, because instead of making cartoons, which are drawings which look like you made it up, photos look real. So I was doing photo cartoons. So I was doing these sequences of images. Like I had a piece called Moment Preserved, where I had a woman sitting at a table getting ready. It was my friend at a breakfast table in my little apartment in Delaware. And then I wrapped everything in aluminum foil. I said, I don't want a photograph of this. I want to save the moment fresh so I can visit it at any time. So I did those kinds of comic photos. Well, then I thought it'd be really interesting to learn more about photography if I took away the picture. What is a photographic mindset anyway? And then I started doing photos for radio and did it on public radio in Philadelphia every morning. I did a 60-second piece or less. And it was not descriptions of what things looked, but really a way that I thought when taking pictures. The kind of smirk you get in the brain when you encounter something. Like, here's one. A little theme music. They would say, what does the speed of light have to do with daily life? The speed of light has never affected me. I mean, Einstein got a lot of mileage out of it, but how fast am I talking? At the speed of talking.
Right.
How is it possible to get a speeding ticket when a car can only go at the speed of car? This is more like physics according to Gertrude Stein, not Einstein. Besides, I want to know something far more complex, far more complicated. I don't think we're ever going to find out what it is. I want to know not the speed of light, but the length of matter. If someone leaves you and it hurts, how long will it matter? So I have about 1,000 of these.
Right.
I mean, I could do a few more just for cutaways if you need them.
Sure. Do a few more.
Let me see. Why would anyone want to be a model? Models have completely missed the point of life. I mean, the reason I do photography of events, I'd rather be in a room of people who are eating and imperfect than people who are perfect and don't eat. I mean, what does a model do? They're supposed to not eat and wear clothes? Me? I'd rather eat and take my clothes off. I went with a guy for 10 months, but he claimed it was only 6 weeks because he only counted the amount of time we saw each other eye to eye. He didn't count when he was off on Europe on assignment. He didn't even count when he was sleeping right next to me because his eyes were closed. Now, at first this really offended me because I'm kind of old-fashioned and I count seeing and not seeing to calculate a time span of a relationship. But then I realized, by his logic, we're only as old as the amount of time we've seen ourselves in the mirror. Why, when we're not seeing ourselves, time doesn't count. And that explains why we can never understand that big number that comes after the comma after our name. So they weren't really jokes. That's what I think. This is like optical humor.
Yeah.
It's this observations, and you laugh at different points in it as a bemusement, which is what happens. Like, stand-up comedy, you're sitting in a chair and you're going, oh, look, there's a funny person. But when I then started to perform these things, because obviously if you're on radio, then you get invited to appear. Well, if you're appearing, you say, well, I might as well do something visual, because now people are looking. We're now, this is what I mean, like understanding the medium and adjusting to what the form is. It's not like I'm saying, oh, now I'm a performer, but now I have certain responsibilities to who it is I'm talking to. So then I started doing things live with pictures because I have no ability to memorize. I'll think up something new to say before I can memorize something. But if I had visual clues, I could do it. So first I brought a lot of props. We'll talk about that flash moment or that flash moment. Then I started doing them in slides. Then I started having so many slides. I now had, 300 to 500 flash moments in one performance that were an arc about a way of knowing something. That performance then became this thing where I was walking in and out of all these images. And the audience is looking at the pictures and understanding how you discover how you see something funny. Like when you leave today, just think of how many times you laugh in your mind. and you're not laughing in your mouth. And I wanted to give laughter to all parts of the body. That seemed very democratic. And it was kind of getting beyond what I call the male ejaculative ha. It's funny, it's funny, it's funny now. And mine's kind of like, oh, that's funny. Oh, that reminds me of a time it's funny. Wait, I think it's funny now. Oh, now it's funny. Oh, now it's funny again.
Right.
See, that's what I call women's humor. It's biologically funny. It's not jokes about boyfriends and weight and hair.
Right.
You know, it's this kind of thing. So then from doing the performances, I said, gee, I instead of showing up, I'll make a film. So I then took 7,000 slides and made a movie. But then when I saw the movie, I realized that this was a film called Pulse of Desire. And this was in the late 80s. I wanted to learn more about how time worked. So then from there, I started performing again to see how words landed on people, where you had to keep your eyes up and interested in them. And so and then from the performance, all the while I was doing photography and documenting things to earn a living, because living indoors is really fun.
Right.
And somewhat expensive.
And living in New York isn't cheap.
And although it's a bargain, as I say, because look at the front yard you get. And so then I said, let me go back to try to draw some of this. I mean, the thing happened at the library. It wasn't like there was an artist in residence position and I volunteered for it. It happened organically. It just happened I was on stage telling a story for the Moth in 2005. The new director of the live programs was the MC. He said, just come as my guest to the programs, some kind of mischief will ensue. And I just listened to the lectures for a while, and I loved it because I was listening to all these things that I wanted to learn. And I realized that in the sphere of things that go on in New York, people do film criticism, book criticism, theater reviews, dance reviews. Who's reviewing the talking? All that talking that's going on. So maybe I'll review it my way. And one night I just brought a pad of paper and started drawing it. And at first I was drawing it in my lap as one big, overall, messy drawing. But that's not the way the conversation felt. What really happened was it is one sentence at a time, one concept at a time. And then from doing these animations, I've arrived at wanting to do Laughing at the Speed of Light, which is taking that stage show and mingling it with everything to create this splurge, which is going to be a piece about how we've transitioned from linear time, from negative film days. Life used to be, you had your friends in high school and they were over. Then you moved on to your college friends. Then you moved on to your family and close friends. And all that, so that now it's ding, 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 ding all at once. And I want to do a piece that's about how digital perception and digital immersion is changing who we are and how we see ourselves. And not like, the people go, ooh, digital technology, worst thing ever, or digital technology, best thing ever. I'm saying digital technology, funniest thing ever. And then there's things that go along with that.
Right. No, I love that. And what I love about the whole progression too is your embrace of action that's just aligned with your curiosity and the possibility of what's to come. A sense of serendipity meets just let me just present what I feel I need to the world. Let me keep exploring and asking questions and trust in the fact that will circle back to me in the form of an interesting life, a career that in some way fills me up. There's a huge amount of faith involved in that you seem to radiate.
Well, thank you very much. I think, though, that there are many people who live as possibilists. There's a lot of people who try to solve their issues, and then, every time you make a decision, you remove a possibility. Now I'm living in New York. Now the possibility of living in Paris is over. If you marry that person, the possibility of that other person's over. And that maturity involves a lot of decisions that remove possibilities. But I always wanted to have the same amount of possibilities even as I made decisions. So I've come up with ways, I consider myself a possibilitist. That how many possibilities can you create and sustain, and how many of those can create new possibilities. And it's a way of actually imagining yourself getting along okay in the future instead of turning grumpy about it. I think you're only allowed to live for as long as you can bear what's going on in the world. So I'm trying hard to keep an open mind. Like, you think all the tattooed and pierced kids that are really trying to piss off their parents and have done a good job, what are their kids going to do, right? And you think about that, I think I already have a clue that they're going to come in, they're going to put a video, they're going to take out a perfectly good eye and put a video camera in it. And they'll be like, you took out an eye and put a video camera? Couldn't you just get a tattoo and a piercing? I mean, you now have a phone in your teeth all the time. You had a good tooth? Like, so I keep thinking that'll be the new pissed off level. And I'm just trying to think ahead.
So I love the idea of being a possibilitist, but how do you even say that? Possibilitist?
Possibilitist.
Possibilitist.
Like the immoralist was at the turn of the last century.
Got it.
Yeah.
One final question that I'd like to, I've just kind of started to ask a lot of people, which is that in your mind, if I throw out the term good life, what does it mean to explore a good life, to live a good life? What comes up for you?
I mean, the freedom to think for yourself and take advice from others. I mean, it's a kind of adjustment. It's a freedom. It's health. Good life is, I'd say, I'm going to answer with one of the careers I had was as a rationalizer. I did this at parties. People would come up and I'd say, you tell me what's wrong and I'll tell you exactly why it should be as it is. Like I would do this in performance. I would set a time, I'd say, and I would make people write it down because you know what everybody hates is somebody talking out loud. Like people raise their hand and say something and ruin the whole thing. So somebody would have a note and say, oh, I have blisters on my feet. Good for you. You have new shoes. Somebody would write a note, I think I really have a crush on you, but I don't know how to tell you. I'd say, an anonymous note is an excellent idea. So I do think it's like reframing things in a way so that you can look at it and understand what could be sorrowful or hard or difficult and come up with ways of solving it that offer then an attitude that's more positive and hopeful, and that you're not either Pollyanna or in a dirge, that somehow you keep a balance that helps you come up with ways to create what is needed to help the situation for yourself and everybody around you be better. Yeah,
I love that. I love that. It's a great place for us to end. So thank you so much for being a guest
Thank you.
today. I've enjoyed the conversation so much. Jonathan Fields and Flash Rosenberg signing off.